Hey there, my name's Mark McCartney, and welcome to the What is a Good Life podcast. Over the last 3 years, I've interviewed over 200 people around this question, not to prescribe you with the universal answer, but to help you to find and define your own answer to this question. I'm hoping the guests' musings, explorations, curiosities, and experiences prompt your own inquiry into what this question means for you. While I'm also trying to share with you what I perceive to be more genuine expressions of the human experience and indeed more meaningful conversations. Which brings us to this week and the 86th episode of the What is a Good Life podcast, and I'm delighted to introduce our guest, Nic Askew. Nic is a filmmaker who has discovered a powerful way to use the camera to deepen people's awareness. He has been described in various ways: an itinerant confessor, a disruptive influence, a monk independent of any religion, and an explorer of the inner world. Over 2 decades of exploring human connection and insight through film, Nic has discovered a profoundly simple way for us to be together, which he calls inner view. This method has led to the creation of the acclaimed Soul Biographies Film Series, an experience of human presence that has resonated with millions. In this enlightening conversation, Nic clearly articulates and points to a deeply felt sense of universal belonging, without the need to do, improve, or follow steps, simply by virtue of our existence and the lack of separation between us. He discusses how he uses the camera, stillness, and nothing to reveal our innate sense of belonging. With an awareness of this belonging, we can move through the world, working on behalf of everyone and everything, with life living itself through us. If you're struggling with feelings of unworthiness, a lack of belonging, or the belief that you need to fix or improve yourself, Nic's insights may help you see through these barriers to the simple truth of your inherent worth and obvious belonging. Look, I enjoyed this conversation with Nic immensely. I think he embodies a really rare sense of stillness. And so I think there's a lot to take from the insights that he's sharing. And so I suspect this conversation will be a really illuminating one to listen to. And if you enjoyed this episode, please like, share, and subscribe if you're on YouTube. And if you're on the podcasting platforms, I'd greatly appreciate any review that you leave, as it greatly helps me at this stage of my podcasting journey. Please check out the show notes below for links to Nic's work, as well as for ways of contacting me, whether that's to assist you in your own self-inquiry, or you'd like to take part in my weekly silent conversations, or if you're looking to develop greater trust and connection amongst groups and teams. Please also check out the show notes for the podcast newsletter, where you can read my reflections on what these conversations you're listening to have evoked in me. So that's all I have to say for this week. I look forward to carrying on the conversation with you next week. And so without further ado, the 86th episode of the What is a Good Life podcast. Nic, thank you very much for joining me today on the What is a Good Life podcast. After speaking with you the last time, this may be the most intrigued I've been to see where one of these conversations goes. So thank you very much for your time today.
Well, thank you for the invite. I've been looking forward to this as well. I remember, very much like filming, I remember the sense of you, like a very deep sense of you. I don't remember exactly what we spoke about, but I remember you. And so I too am intrigued about where this might go.
So the only order I shall bring to proceedings, Nic, will be the first question that I always ask, which is there a question you're trying to answer as you move through life?
I would have said no normally. I know it's odd with someone with a surname of Askew, but I don't really have any questions. But actually, I probably do. I'm always wondering about, well, what am I doing here? Like, what is this strange work that I do? Strange in the sense that it's not normal. What's its place, and what am I meant to do with it? I still try to answer that, and I remembered something I'd written years ago for someone else's book, and I can't remember what the prompt was. But it has a question at the end of it, or it had a question when I read it again this morning, and I might read it out just as a place to start. It was in a book, and I can't remember the name of the book or what the question was that provoked me to write this. But mostly people wrote prose, but I wrote this, and it was called, or it is called, "As the Light Makes Its Way." I'm going to have to read it from down here, as I can't remember it. This is how it goes. A man had lived in his imagination ever since he was a boy, for it was full of wonder and adventure when set against the outer world that housed his everyday life. His imagination surrounded him in light, the outer world in a darker shade. But as he waited for this outer world to catch the light, he realized that it might not. And so he stepped out into the world, hand in hand with his imagination, knowing that together they would bring light to the darkest of corners. And he is you and me, and together the imagination of our collective soul has already begun its inevitable work as the light makes its way towards the experience of the world. And I think I wrote it with a character in mind, with someone in mind, someone I was helping actually run for president of their country at the time, long time ago. But I think I might have been writing it about myself, actually, which I probably do a lot of the time. When I look back at all the things I've written, I can see myself in them. And I suppose that there was a question. It's like, well, am I doing the right thing with this? Am I, have I, come down to earth properly in the best way that I can to share what I can see? I'm not sure the answer. I think it's, anyway, there's a question in there somewhere. I'm not entirely sure what it is, but there was suddenly a realization of, I wrote that. I think I wrote it about myself. And I don't know whether I have. I don't know whether I'm doing this as well as I could be. Like I know what I see. Like I remember our last conversation, and I remember what I saw. And I want to point to it. I think that's why I make films. It's the capture of an experience where I see something of someone, something deep and interior. And I want to tell people, hey, look, can you see? Can you see that person beyond, as Rumi said, all wrongdoing and right doing? There's a field, I'll meet you there. Can you see? Like beyond all sense of who someone is, and beyond all the events of a life and the opinions one might hold of something, there is someone. And that someone is there's no separation. And I'm attempting to point to that. And sometimes I just think, God, I don't know if anyone will see. I know some people do, but it seems to be so difficult, yet it seems so simple. And I suppose I'm wondering about that. Is there something else I should be doing? Is what I'm doing enough? Anyway, there's a question in there somewhere. Not sure what it is.
What would the sense of like bringing it to earth or bringing it to the ground, like what would that entail?
Well, I think I do bring it into the world in many ways. This very simple thing. And this is where I recognize some of the things you'd written, this stillness. I know you hold these sessions where nothing is said. That's how I start everything, with filming. Whether it's in an auditorium of 1,000 people and there's someone in front of my camera broadcast onto big screens, it starts with nothing. Just nothing. And it might continue. It might just be nothing, no act, no words, no anything seemingly physical. But what happens is extraordinary. In a stillness, one becomes aware. And what you become aware of is all sorts of things. You're aware of your place in the world, aware of a tremendous sense of peace and that you're all right, that all is well, that you're included, a sense of connection with everything around because that's the way it is, a sense of insight as well. And so that stillness is a really important thing and a very, very simple thing. And so I tend to start from there always. And so my attempts in the world have been to bring a sense of that in some demonstrable way, either through film. That can be a challenge because of people's attention spans. Well, if there's only one shot, like my films are human portraits, all you see is that, just that, in monochrome as well. No color to entertain you. That's why I'm like this. No distraction. It's almost as if I should probably record something along this line. There was a joke in Hollywood years ago. Well, that sounds a bit grandiose, but I was in Hollywood and I was making a film for a movement that had recognized the system, Hollywood's impact on the world. And I made the opening film for the movement. It was Jim Carrey and Eckhart Tolle and a few others. And people kind of kept on coming up to me and saying, couldn't you just put like a special effect or an explosion into your films? And I know what they meant. It was just one shot. There was no, changing shots or B-roll or anything like that. And the real response, and what I didn't say, and I probably should have said, was, when you're paying attention to someone, you don't have many shots. You're not always looking away for distraction or entertainment. If you're going to give someone your attention, why wouldn't you just give them your attention? I mean, your full and undivided attention. Still, how would you hope to ever know someone if you didn't give that? Hence, my films, this experience of stillness, are a challenge because we're so used to looking away or looking for something else. So I'm essentially attempting to bring a sense of this stillness and what may come from it. And of course, it comes in many other iterations as well, in being on a stage in front of people, filming live and pointing very kind of gently to what is so simple. If you were to still for a moment, your intelligence changes. It goes from your mind to something much larger than your mind, something much deeper than your mind. And that's an incredible resource with which to lead one's life. It changes everything. I think it would change the world demonstrably if where we were caused to act from was not of the mind. It was from this other place, which oddly enough is a unitive place, is the place we all belong to each other. I mean, that's probably the core of it. That's what I'm trying to say or trying to point to, that we belong to each other. And not that we need to do something in order to belong to each other, but that we do belong to each other. There's no journey to it. There's no steps to it. We just do. And the only way you'll ever know that is to be still enough to become aware of it. And that's a really simple thing. I remember reading something you'd written about these sessions that you run online where people come and there's no words to exchange. You're just kind of sitting there. And to a let's say a normal person, to most, that would just seem an inexorable waste of time. Well, what do? You're not using your time for anything. But what it demonstrates, I think, is this innate understanding of an antithetical way, an other way round. We seem to always be at the center trying to work everything out so that we can move it on. But there is this other way round where life is essentially trying to live itself through you. And if you would let it, it could. And so where you're caused to act from changes. And so I can imagine what would happen in that time. I imagine some people would come along, be terrified at first with the sheer, noise of the silence, like, oh my God, because it's not the habit. It's not whoever sat still. yeah, it's
Mm.
terrifying. And then suddenly it's not. And then, biologically, your nervous system just calms down. And there can be this overwhelming sense of peace and all that comes with that. Yet nothing was being done demonstrably. It was more the subtraction of everything. And I think that's what I stumbled upon by sitting so still with so many people over the last couple of decades, was the subtraction of everything. It's very simple. I was on a call yesterday with someone who had spent time in this, and this I gave it a name. I called it inner view, inner as in interior, largely because that's what you end up seeing of someone, their inner view, and you realize you're looking at a reflection. And it's very simple. And the instruction is only twofold. It's going to start with nothing, by which I mean no thing, no act on your part, and then let it. Let the experience find you, not you it. That's it. So this guy had taken it into a nursing environment where there was quite a lot of stress. I think it was probably emergency medicine or something. And he said his understanding of it was that he just asked people to sit 2 by 2 with each other. He said, just for 2 minutes, and you have permission to do absolutely nothing. And people sat there for 2 minutes and everything changed. It's that simple. There's a stillness, then you become aware. It's just stillness isn't a usual thing, but it's a very simple thing. And I know people do lots of things to bring on stillness, and those are all well and fine, but I think it's even simpler than that. I don't think there's anything to do. In fact, I know there's a way. This is nothing, no thing, no act on your part. And I've observed the nature of that and why. So everything that I usually talk about with that is just an invitation to set something that you thought you should be doing down. Even listening intently, even feeding back, even being compassionate, even being anything you give was never asked for. I know it seems nice, but what if it was nothing? What if there was just clear, open space? Nothing. And then someone will become aware. I think it's that simple. And I think your original question was something along the lines of, well, what would it look like in the world? Well, probably a little bit like that, a very simple thing. But it does have the challenge of the enculturated way that we are, the enculturated way that we are with each other, with ourselves, always moving, always doing something for some endeavor. And I think the primary endeavor of people is probably to reach for something that might feel like belonging, like you're included. Like if you look underneath the underneath of why people do things, act in certain ways, it seems to be there's this journey, and encoded in the human way seems to be this idea of development and a place to which you have to reach in order to be part of it, in order to be acceptable, in order to be enough, in order to belong. And it's encoded in society almost, forever reaching higher, forever moving. And I'm not sure it's true. So, you may notice this. Well, no, I know you notice this because you told me. From my position by the side of a camera or with a camera, sitting so still with people for so many years, and I don't even really ask questions. Just kind of sit there. Everything starts from a stillness and then it emerges rather than it is provoked and drawn out of someone. In those moments, you realize that we belong to each other, as I said previously, you realize that everything is connected anyway, and there's no journey for that. So there's nothing that needs to be done for it to be so. It just is. It just hasn't been experienced because it's not noticed. And it just seems the simplest way to notice is to subtract everything. And therein lies the challenge. It's like you have something so terribly simple that you just wish people would, well, you'd hope that someone might stumble into, and that sets something in motion.
There's something, though, that you talk about with this sense of belonging. And even when you mentioned this sense of belonging, there is like, I felt a mistiness in my eyes. And I think that may have happened the last time that you touched on that. And sometimes when I hear people speak, they almost speak of this, there's no separation between you and I, but they almost speak about it in a studied sense of non-duality, if you get me. Like, so it sounds like they're repeating the words that somebody else has said, not necessarily suggesting a technique, but maybe even oddly a part of a tribe that also follow this belief. For you, I get a real strong sense of this is really your felt experience of life.
Yeah.
And that you're revealing that. And you're just allowing even the stillness to do its work. Can you give me a sense of just when you came into being, into contact, whatever way fits that, for you to have such a strongly felt sense of this?
Yeah, I've thought about this before because I've been asked, how did you come to this? Firstly, is it true? I think it's true. That's my sense. So I've sat for 2 decades with people very still. I didn't mean to. It just kind of happened, and it seemed the right thing to do when I had a camera with someone. It seemed the wrong thing to do to ask an incessant load of questions, because that was just, it would be interesting, but I couldn't see someone. And I think what I was endeavoring to do all along was see what I could always see. And so if I cast my mind back to the experience of being a kid, I could always see this. I had no context and I didn't know what it was. I just thought that it was normal. And I couldn't understand why there was so much drama and why people were so oppositional. Yeah, it was a very confusing time, really. It's like the world didn't make any sense. And later I understood why it didn't make any sense, because of the way that I could see people. So I don't know why it was like that. I did, maybe I just kind of came in with it. I haven't sought to understand it. But as a result, I've never really done anything. So I've hardly ever read a book. I can read, just to be clear. But I've chosen not to go study stuff because I know a much better place to get a sense of it. So why read about someone else's experience when you can literally just sit with someone and there's the experience. And you don't even have to sit with someone close up. It happened from the edge of a room. And I don't know why. And I know there's this impulse to want to know how it all works. But I think that's a red herring as well. Not only a red herring, I think it might even keep it away, because the very nature of understanding is really of the mind. It's not knowing, it's understanding. And the reason we'd want to understand how it works is so that we can make it happen. But we don't make it happen. That keeps it away as well. So the search is the thing that keeps it away. But if you were to set it down, there it is. So the best thing I can do, thinking about it, is not really talk about it, is just do it, except it's not doing it. It's the opposite of that. But then it's kind of mysteriously strange, because that would mean I would have to wander around the world just doing nothing, essentially. Because nothing can touch the experience of it. No words can touch, no explanation or the explanation of the way to it could be true or could even touch the experience of it. And that's essentially what happens. No matter what I say up front, the heart of the experience is a remarkable thing, because there's a stillness, and then someone becomes aware. And I think what someone becomes aware of is what they are, what they're a part of, and almost what they're capable of from that place. And it can be very, very different. And I think it's pretty haunting in a way, because it doesn't really come with a huge set of instructions. And even the aftermath of it, you become aware, but now you have to work that bit out. And people do have trouble describing it. I have trouble describing it. Yet it's the experience. It's also not just the experience. It seems to be what so many, well, maybe what we're all looking for in a way. Just this, I want to be part of it. And the irony is, well, you are. There's nothing that needs to be done, although it seems like there is, because that's what one has led oneself to believe. Because you look out. The nature of sight is you look out and you see all these physical things, and all around the world, everything is shouting back at you. You could be more. Really, you do this, and this, and you'll get through the gates of heaven or nirvana or some cultural equivalent, or success. You could reach higher, and it never ends. But peace doesn't exist in any of that. It's not. Now this is sounding a little bit mysterious. It's not really of time. There's, in that respect, you're just included anyway. And that's, I can't explain it, but can not do it. I remember when we last spoke, there was this sense, there was a moment, it was, oh, there you are. Now this is kind of interesting, because we have no requirement now. Like, we don't have to make this into anything. We can literally just follow the thread, without the fear of wasting our time, without the fear of this not being useful to our various endeavors or useful to the world or anything like that. There was just a tremendous sense of peace. And from there's a very, very different experience. So I think your question was, if it was a question, if I can remember back, it was really about the juxtaposition of, well, it seems like I experience it. I think I do sometimes not. But I know it's always there. Like, it's never not there. And that's a great relief when you realize, I often have people in front of the camera, and I know there's trauma. I know people have had, the human experience is pretty traumatic, I think, in if you look at it in one way. And people do have demonstrable situations where terrible things have happened. And I remember catching what was happening. And I know that the response is usually to trauma is, well, let's understand it, like understand where it came from, what it is, so that we can do something about it and resolve it. And that, what an intelligent thing to do. And I think there's a lot of that. And I think there's probably a lot of amazingly wonderful work that happens in that space, as in all spaces. But I don't think many people thought to try a completely different approach, which is nothing. What if life itself would make you aware that you're all right? And so I've had many examples where people have been in front of the camera and wanting to talk about, and often in crowds. This isn't a private thing. I mainly film in crowds with the image projected up onto big screens. It could just be 10 people in a room in some of the smaller programs through to big auditoriums. And someone wants to almost air what's going on. And sometimes they don't even need to. You just kind of sit there. But who thought to use stillness to become aware and let it disappear? It doesn't really make much sense. Well, if you're not doing something to address it, how could it resolve itself? But I think it can.
I once held a silent conversation where, the instruction kind of is to express whatever is emerging now. And whatever came up for them was related to their childhood. And you could see that there was quite a bit of pain there. And one of my other kind of instructions in the group is we don't ask each other's questions, because if another part of it is if nobody wants to speak at all, you just stay silent for the 75 minutes that these things go on for. And they said what they said. And for the first time, I kind of wanted something from the group, if you know what I mean. And I'd be lying if I just said I was completely present. There was some stillness, but there was also maybe a desire just that no one would jump in. And nobody said a word. And then the next person just added what they had to say from their own experience. It was almost layering experience on top of experience. And I always remember the person at the end of the group just wanted to say, I felt incredibly seen, acknowledged, and supported, and held in the silence. And I even loved the fact that there was almost like a verb to the silence. Do you know what I mean? Just even from the felt experience, that it was so clear that even though nobody was in air quotes doing something happened. And I don't know, that's just what you're saying makes me think of that.
That's how it is. So we have this assumption that we have a life and we're the ones living it, and we experience the consequence of our actions. That's how it is, isn't it? If you do well, if you're diligent and you do these things, you lead a good life. Maybe the question to your podcast. And if you don't do good things, you're not diligent and you don't work hard and you don't do these things, and you don't have a bit of luck or all those things, you don't live a good life, and all the shades in between. But what if it wasn't like that? What if you weren't the one centrally possessing a life? What if life was essentially seeking to live itself through you, and it wasn't as it seems? Because in that first instance, which I think is how most people see the world, you're the one doing something. So someone sitting in 75 minutes of essentially no act, in stillness, call it silence, which is the absence of words, but just in a kind of stillness. You think nothing's going on, but something is going on, but you're just not doing it. It's running through you. It's a stream of something, a stream of consciousness running through you. You just It happens because there's an absence of the normal things that prevent it from happening, or you being aware of it. And that talks to the very different way to this. This stillness. Like, what if life was trying to live us? So we're not quite as in control as we thought we were. So I can imagine what would happen. I mean, I'd noticed it starkly when filming in the early days. I have many early examples of where I'm with someone. There was one, I think it was probably the first one that was so vivid for me. And someone's child had been murdered, stabbed to death. And I didn't even know why I was there. I was filming it. It was like I turned up at this place. I didn't even know the story, but I knew something was coming. And I remember the experience of it being very still. And the subject was talking about all things but that. And I knew that. And I didn't ask any questions. And then there was like no words for maybe 4 or 5 minutes, which can seem like an eternity to someone trying to solve something. And then there was this kind of pleading with me to please change the subject, or just get me out of here. And I remember at that point just thinking, what am I meant to do? Like, really, what would a kind human being do? How can I be helpful? Do I say it will be all right? I can't do that because I don't know. Can I encourage the person? Can I say, I'll give you this? Or can I be compassionate? Can I be anything? And then there was almost like a stabbing sensation of, no, it's not your place. You're not the witness. It's not your job. There is no job here. Witnessing people is not your job. That I ended up calling it the field, like the conscious field, presence, if you like. The atmosphere that we live in and also we're a part of is the witness. It's the stillness. It's that is the witness to someone. So there's no job. There's no job to do. There's no feeding back what you're hearing. There's no active listening, really intently listening and processing the words. There's no holding of space. Space doesn't need to be held. Space is just there. In fact, we're included in space. We're part of space. You don't need to hold it. You don't. I don't. This person in front of the camera didn't. It was just an eerie sensation in those early days of, oh, there really is no job here, unless you're called to do so. And sometimes I feel this overwhelming sense of I have to do something. But I have to recognize where that comes from. If it's me thinking about it, nah, that's to do with me. So the job that we could hold for each other at certain times, certainly not all the time, is one of non-interference almost at all, like the subtraction of everything. Kindness, compassion, all those things which are actually reactions to something. They're not required. They shut things down. I remember teaching this many times. I call it the interview method, except the funny part of it is there is no method, because it's the absence of everything. And I remember someone being fascinated. We had a weekend and there were probably 30, 35 people there and big screen set up. And I thought, right, okay, now's the time to get everyone to have a go, get up and then observe and see what happens. And I remember 2 people sitting there, and there was a girl in front of the camera and a boy behind the camera. They were older. I'd use girl and boy. I quite like the description. A female and a male. Not that that's that relevant. And there was an experience, absolutely. And the girl in front of the camera had quite a time of it. There was a kind of witnessing and something was opening up. And the guy behind the camera, he was being very kind. and it looked like a very normal thing to do. You'd be really understanding of this situation. It's really nice to have someone who's compassionate and really understands what you're going through. And when it came to unraveling what had gone on, after the guy had said, I just felt that this person needed this, like she was having a hard time. She just stood bolt upright and said, I didn't want it. I didn't ask for it. It shut everything down. It made me feel like you were giving me something I didn't want. And I stopped. And that was, incredible to see, because I think that many people came aware of how often they're always trying to do something in the world, always trying to do something with someone else, with time, with people. But what if you didn't? And I think that's where, this art of stillness comes in, this kind of the absence of all the things. And in that moment, you become aware. You see people deeply. In other words, what you do is you experience people deeply, because there's no actual act of seeing. The experience of them comes towards you almost. You're caught by insight which fills your bones. And it wasn't there before, seemingly. You hadn't noticed it, but you suddenly know, I've got to do this, or I've got to do that, or I should stop this, or I should stop that. And all manner of other things as well. It's a completely different type of intelligence, which kind of just hangs in the air, waiting to be recognized. And it's a very simple thing.
I think, though, just when you said that, what came up for me was a sense that that's where the place of no separation is. So you almost, it's not even, it's once again, it's the witnessing through a felt sense of togetherness, or a lack of separation. So what's mine is yours, but not in this way that mine is yours, in that I've had an experience like that too, so I can connect with what you're saying, just almost in the deepest sense of sharing. And I don't even know what I mean by that, but that feels as close as I'll get to it.
Yeah, there is this. It's almost like, I think this is what happens so readily in front of the camera, and the camera's only important, relevant, because you can see it happening, you can feel it happening live, because it's projected, and you can't miss it, because it's at such large scale. But it's almost like the time and space between people collapses, like it just becomes irrelevant. And then the thing that everyone talks about and writes about and sings about is felt. There's a guy who he wrote to me, and he'd been in front of the camera kind of by accident. Actually, he came to a little mini program kind of thing I was doing around an event I was talking at, and he just ended up in front of the camera and had quite a time of it. He didn't mean to get up in front, and he didn't mean to blurt out what he blurted out, but it seemed to be blurted out, and it seemed to change some things. What his description of it was, and I think it's in the page that tries to describe all this on one of my sites. He said something like he'd spent time with one of the world's foremost poets, who is really eloquent about talking about this. But he said in that moment, what he did was he understood what had been written. So he felt it, in other words. And he suddenly understood what those words were actually pointing to. And I suppose that's important in a way, because it's a wonderful notion, isn't it, that we're all together in this and we're all included. But it's entirely a frustrating idea if you don't feel it. It's just like, it's just, it never ends. Always reaching, always trying to understand, always moving, always trying to study, do this, spiritually develop in this way or personally develop in that way. It's this forever journey of transformation. And I don't know this to be absolutely true, but my sense is, well, what if there wasn't a transformational journey to have in the way of geography and time? You do these things and you get to this place. What if you were just still, and by still I mean still. In fact, I wrote a poem once called "Run," and I think it was about this. And there was a line that said something like, "Well, slowing down is still running."
Yeah.
But if you stop, then you become aware that there is no journey because you were included, you were a part of it anyway. Not as an idea, as something you felt and you can't even describe, but you know it. Now you're free. And then you question it because you think, well, it can't be that simple. Like I had someone the other day that I wrote a terribly, I call it offensive piece called "The Girl in the Entrance Hall." I should read it. Why not? If you don't mind, you had to X-ray. No, it's not offensive as in it's got bad language in. It's offensive because it's terrifying in a way for some. It's not very long. And it was just based off the back of an experience that I had. And then I'll tell you what happened after, which I think is important because it's so simple. Like this moment, I know we like to overcomplicate things only because we're using theirs. So this is my experience, or how I wrote about this experience that I had in a actual physical entrance hall. It's quite a grand entrance hall, actually. So the entrance hall. I'm in an entrance hall, and I look towards the furthest doorway. I see her. She looks up and immediately casts her eyes downwards. She assumes that I can see her. I can. But what she believes I can see, she's ashamed of. She doesn't wish for it to be seen by anyone. She spent a lifetime holding up a facade, a burdensome untruth, forever against the weight of gravity. But what I see is not that. And if she could see what I see, I imagine that her life would be so very different. I wish that for her. I wish she'd look up. It was there all along. You just didn't know it. So I decided, I stuck that one out, and I decided to run a 20-minute something on Zoom. So I started out and I read those words, and then I didn't say anything. And then I witnessed someone in my interview fashion on Zoom, so I pinned him to the screen, and we just kind of sat there for, I think, a minute, and then didn't really say anything. And then someone wrote to me, and there's a piece on the Substack that I'm running at the moment, which is called, I think it's called something like "The Girl Who Recognized the Girl in the Entrance Hall." And an incredible thing happened. In those quiet minutes, someone realized that they were all right. After 50 years of abuse, or the experience of the aftermath of abuse and stuff like that, yet nothing was done. I went back and checked. there's because I know you can have these things called peak experiences where suddenly it seems all right, and they're kind of the mind. Oh, that's a good, yeah, of course, I'm all right, but that's not the experience of it. And I haven't checked in the last few weeks, but I did check. And what if that was a possibility? That you weren't the one necessarily to do all the work on the things that need resolving. What if life itself, if you were to let it, would show you that you're all right, that you're a part of this, no matter what you may think? What if you could have that experience without doing anything? Of course, there's the challenge of, well, how does one be still? Well, actually, I think it's probably simpler than one could ever know. It's just the absence of things. I'm sure I imagine this happens all the time because the experience is always there. It doesn't need to be worked towards. Connection doesn't need to, isn't the result of a certain set of conditions. It's just always there. We just didn't notice it. Which is kind of great news in a way, because there's nothing to do to deserve this. You were enough anyway.
Which I think is almost like, I don't know, it's one of the most kind of heretical ideas to the way that we're kind of set up at the moment. And I think, though, if we were to pay a little bit more attention, that we'd be left with that we'd be left with no doubt that we've experienced this at some point. Like, that we have experiences that point to what you're saying. But I think even in ways people might even justify those experiences by saying, well, I was meditating for 3 months before and then this happened. Like, I think we've a proclivity almost to do the opposite of subtract, but to make meaning from something that may be convenient to a belief that we already held.
Yeah, I know there's I think people experience this all the time. Like, you can be in massive pain. Life can be a pain sometimes. But then in the very next moment, you're doing something and it's not there because you're fully into something else. I don't know, be absurd here. Anything from you're in a car chase to you tripped over a paving curb to someone slaps you in the face to you're playing sport and you're just really into it. It doesn't exist. The pain doesn't exist then, so it was there. And then you got something like meditation, for example. And I know. I mean, I've never meditated as such. My wife told me I was a fool because there's not much that I do that isn't that. But there's no process to it. I'm just kind of still. But I know that it's easy to think that what you were doing caused the feeling. I'm not sure that's true, though, because this is just there, this capacity we have to know beyond an understanding, to just know that we're part of this. We were always part of this. There was never doubt. You belong. We belong to each other. To know that. It was just there. What you did, whether it were meditating or something, it's very easy to assign that as the cause. This changed the conditions. I made this happen. There you are again, right at the center of it, thinking you're causing things. But you didn't. It was always there. So meditation can essentially cause this. In other words, show you what was just there. as can anything else. Anything. Because it's always there. And if we were to know that, how would you describe that? Well, you might describe it as you're enough, or you're included, you belong, whatever the way of description is. If one were to know that, I think people would be caused to act in a very different way. Because the nature of it is unitive. The nature of it is that we belong to each other. You're part of this. So now you're caused to act from that place. And so what you're doing is you're kind of acting on behalf of all. And this is where so many movements are happening, where people become essentially aware. I mean, not aware as an idea, aware as an experience. I just know I'm part of everything. And therefore I'm going to work on behalf of everyone. And there's a lot of people, I come across people all the time because of the nature of what I do, who have somehow realized that, whether they can express it or not, and they're driven to work towards that endeavor of including everyone because they felt it. And I think that's the work. Maybe that's the point of the first thing I read, as the light finds its way. If that's what it was called. The more people that experience that, the better. In a moment, like your podcast, for example, there might be an episode where someone's listening away, and then suddenly there's this moment where everything just opens up, and it wasn't even particularly about what someone was saying. There was just an experience there. Maybe even in between the words. In between the words is a good thing because it doesn't send you to your head. And therefore it's a contribution to just like passing it on, going, oh, you're included, you're part of this. And someone feels it.
When did you get this sense of life almost, or acting not on behalf of life, but life moving through you? Like, I'm not saying that there was if there was a seminal moment, fine, but just even if there was a sense of that building or a clarity around it.
Yeah, I can. It was always there. I always knew life was moving through me. I didn't know that's what it was. And then there were a few moments where I realized something important, but that was almost just retrospectively explaining something that I was experiencing. One was this is strange. I was walking down a street in Brooklyn, New York, and I looked across the road, and I suddenly realized why everyone hurt. And I don't know why, but I realized that people thought they were separate, and it had never occurred to me to think that before. I didn't understand it. And then as I picked the camera up, which was a kind of accident of stillness, I was just still, not doing anything, and in the absence of everything, this notion that I had to pick a camera up with nothing else came. It just kind of found me, as came the other way, the antithetical way. As I started to do that, I realized, and this was really important for me in making film, words only come from one or two places. It's kind of obvious. Now I look at it, because I used to sit still with people, and then I would have them in the edit, and I would watch it for a month. I'd watch footage for a month, going, what's trying to be made here? Not what am I making, but what's trying to be made. And I realized, sometimes people speak to me, or at me in the hope that something will happen. Generally, that's what people do mainly. And then there's a point at which all that falls away, and it's if someone is being spoken through, like a stream of consciousness. And the characteristic of that is that there is no vivid memory of what's said, and there's no sense of time. And you know it's that, and you can feel it as well. You watch it back in the edit, it's like, oh my God, that moment, where someone was saying something. There's something about those words. Yet you might have found someone else who was speaking at you. And, in the early days, I used to film a lot of famous people, rock stars and stuff. And God, it was turgid. It was just like, God, I could put this out. And a lot of people would watch it, but it doesn't do any good in the world. So I wouldn't make film of it. And then I realized it's not just words that come from one or two places. You speak to someone or at someone, or you're spoken through. I realized it's all of life. It's like, oh, that's interesting. Wow. So if you were to let it, it's almost a reasonable definition of insight, of an intuitive intelligence. If you were still, suddenly you'd know. And so the noticing of where language came from, where words came from, the two places, call it inner and outer, although I'm not sure there's a geography to that. That's a good way of describing it, though. In other words, or it came from, like people like to say, your ego. That's a bit kind of rude. Or it came from somewhere else. It came from somewhere deeply interior, which might not be interior because it's everywhere. And when words come from there, people recognize them. You don't know why, but why? You might not know why, but the energy of what's being said has come from this place that we all recognize because we're all part of it. And those are words that I think move the world in a good way. And so I tried to make films from that. But the linking of that to, maybe it's all of life. Maybe there we are trying to move our life. Like, so, okay, here's maybe this. All right, I'll try and explain it. So, but I will probably fail in explaining. So there someone is feeling separate, looking around the world for evidence, for ideas of what on earth you got to do to be included in this life. And there's an awful lot of advice and evidence and stuff, or do this, do this, do this. And so this life is full of reaching higher and higher and higher all the time, or further and further, or everywhere but here. Like it's over there. So it's always in the future. It's always over there. It's exhausting. It's never ending. This perilous journey of becoming someone never ends. Absolutely exhausting. Relentless, almost. And even if you're successful, it still goes on. You still sit there and you're feeling there's something missing. I don't know what it is, but I'm not yet enough. So you keep going and you keep going and you keep going, and then you probably keel over and you never got to where you thought you would be. But I would think that you were always where you were meant to be. Or you were not meant to be. You are. You're it. Yeah, it wasn't a very good explanation, but I think there's something terribly simple that is in the grasp of anyone to know, because it already is. And I'm not sure any way is the best way to get to it, because there's nowhere to get to. It's kind of like a riddle, but it's not. It's like, yeah, you're right. Yeah.
I think, though, it's when the experience is experienced, all kind of not only words pointing to it, but the sense of the simplicity of it is kind of staggering given the complexity that we think stands in our way. So it's almost like it's almost not being able to believe what is at the end of your nose purely because we've almost been taught, conditioned, trained, whatever way you want to describe it, to know that you have to work for this moment, or that something has to be done, like something has to be done. Like that's almost the core belief of it. And so when it then is experienced, it's without being an aggressive confrontation, it leaves one with a lot of not questions, but almost like resolving or settling to do. Like it's all like almost the residue in their life just has to sink to the bottom of the pond again.
Yeah, I think how you just described it, and I can't remember the exact words, so I hope the recording's working. I think you did it really well. Like you almost can't believe it could be this simple because everything shouts something very different. And you mentioned the word heretical. It's like, God, I'm glad I didn't live in the 1600s. And we're saying this because you couldn't without being drawn and quartered or burnt at the stake, because it essentially says you're right. There is no gate of heaven to deserve to get through. You're it. And even in its modern iteration, there's a huge, I mean, this might just be cynical, and I might be off mark here, and I might even be wrong, because I think all things are okay. I think there's a huge personal development industry set up, for example. And most of it, I think, is probably a wonderful thing. It's like it has everyone's best interest at heart. You're trying to resolve issues that are just very troubling to people. But they seem a little overcomplicated sometimes, because the heretical idea at the heart of this is like, what if you were all right anyway? Could you believe what's right at the end of your nose? It doesn't mean you couldn't transform in so many other different ways. You couldn't become a better father, partner, filmmaker, gardener, all these things that, the stuff of life. But the existential stuff, the stuff that makes you so uncomfortable, that almost drives you to do everything, if you were to examine it, this uncomfortableness, why you couldn't pay attention to this sense of intuitive intelligence that was always trying to say, you could be here. What about this? You couldn't pay attention because you were so on edge, because you were just trying to be enough. What if the answer to that wasn't a transformational journey? There was just a stillness, and you realized it. So there's a stark difference between transformation, which is the movement of you towards becoming enough, essentially, and realization, which is a journey, which is no journey, which is it's a moment of almost no time where you realize you're all right, and you always were. Those are two, in one respect, they're two very polar opposite things. And if the realization thing was right, and I know realization has been used in all sorts of spiritual movements and stuff, but I mean simpler than all of that. No steps towards. There was no steps towards, because you were always part of this thing. No need to talk about, what's it called? You mentioned it early, non-dual. I hear a lot about that. I don't really pay much attention. I haven't paid much attention to all the conversations about that. Maybe it's just a lot simpler than all of that. It's not of the mind. It's just not of the mind. It doesn't need to be understood and worked towards, etc. It just still, and then you kind of notice it. Like as you draw attention to, you probably do anyway. But there are moments in a day. In fact, I remember one guy, he was trying to work me out. He was always trying to work me out. And then he brought up the name Paramahansa Yogananda. And I listened to his book, the autobiography of Yogi, which I thought was wonderful. It feels a certain way. And he evoked this name, and he said, yeah, but someone like that was like always in bliss. And I said, and I don't know if this is true, I just made an observation. I said, oh, yeah, mate, I think the clock goes back to zero every moment. In a moment, you either notice it or you don't. It's always there. So you can be what they call enlightened, but then you can drop a watermelon on your foot or something, and it's like, ow, and you're out of it. So it's like it's always there, but it's not always noticed. So I'm not sure about anything really. But I know that in a moment between two people, that's the main thing. And a moment between two people, the time and space can collapse, and you can feel at peace.
I think there's the noting of time. I think is really it's really significant. Like because in both times I've been in conversation with you, the sense of stillness I experience does lead to something almost very, I don't want to say cut off from a typical experience, but it does seem a little removed from my sense of time. Like there's of the way in which I try to coordinate myself, usually time may be one of them. I don't know, like even where that's coming from per se, but there is a really strong sense of, or strong awareness of the absence of that being as kind of pressing as it may be in some other situations.
Yeah, I recognize that. The relationship with time, and when I'm with people and I'm filming, time seems to just kind of disappear, not become relevant. People get lost. People come along. I'm in England in next month. I've got a couple of experiences running, one for 3 days, one for 4 days, and the instruction is, well, look, on one of them anyways, is come for nothing as best you can, and then there'll be something, but that's a big ask for people to come for nothing, because people seldom act without having some sense of what's to be created or moved towards. But the other instructions are, well, we'll start and we'll get lost, and then it'll be over, and that the time in between will, it doesn't seem to exist. You're just in it. And yeah, as you say that, I just wonder, with reference to that first thing I read out, however long ago that was, as the light finds its way, I wonder whether this experience, because I know this, I mean, one of the things that I've been, I've put my hands up, I've probably been hiding from for a long time, is that I know that I have this sense of stillness about me. There's this way, and I know people feel it, and I just evidence all the time people say, and I've always called it something else. I've always blamed it on the camera, but I know in some sense, no, I'm just very still, and it seems to encourage people or pull someone into this still point as well. which can be a contribution. And then I wonder, at the beginning you asked me whether, what am I trying to answer? And it's almost like, well, is this of the real world? I don't think I am of the real world in some respects. It's very interior. There's that. And I know I can bring that into the world. I do. But I wonder whether there's something else. I wonder how that works in the very physical world. I mean, I know it seems to shake something very deep in people, and then the physical things start to evolve. I'm just wondering about my sense of, did I land on Earth yet? That's a terrible thing to say, man. Yeah, sometimes I'm not sure.
There's been a question floating around in the ether for me that I thought I'd pick up again, and I guess it seems like a suitable time for it just based on what you said, which was just given all that we've discussed, the question you kind of had in your head at one point as well is, am I doing it right? Or maybe that's not verbatim, but just something of that essence, which it kind of seems to tie into what you were saying there.
Yeah, I mean, where does that come from? It's not quite, am I doing it right? It's, could I be doing something else with it? Like I'm always, I used to joke that I tried 1,000 things with this. And I probably hadn't in those early days tried 1,000 things, but I definitely tried 1,000 things now. 1,000 ways. And I should probably just give that up. Because it's just trying to represent something in a way that it shouldn't be represented. I should probably just go, look, I'm not entirely sure what it is, but right at the heart of it, it seems to be where there is this experience of peace. In other words, a moment in time where you realize that you're okay. And from there, you can run. But you're running with something as opposed to away from something. And maybe it should just be as simple as that, as opposed to me trying 1,000 things to try and be in service or to try to do the right thing with this. Yeah, probably. That's kind of, yeah, I mean, I suppose it's what I'm pointing at anyway, if you were to just let it. The work of this, the experience of this is like, it's like not even falling off a log, if you know that simile. Falling off a log is kind of easy. This is not even that. It's that simple. It's that simple. It's just every time someone in front of the camera, sit there, there's nothing to do. There's no space to hold, no one to be. In fact, I used to say, there's nothing to do and there's no one to do it. Took 2 years for someone to ask me what I was saying. I didn't quite understand it, but I do now. So the work of it is just kind of simple. The bringing people to it is not. Let's think of this. The bringing people to this. One, I'm not sure one should bring someone to this. They need to come at their own volition. And it's a very simple thing. And the challenge is, could someone believe this to be true? This to be so simple and therefore within reach? That there's nothing to do to realize this, to become aware of this. To drop the game of trying to explain something that can't really be explained terribly well. Because I have noticed that in the main, we people are not very good about stepping towards something without some sense of certainty of what might come. And therefore, this is probably better wrapped up in the realm of mystery, just a kind of very simple experience to, I'll give it a go. Almost like a fire walk or an ice plunge or something like that. You've got a kind of idea of what this could be, but you don't really, not until you do it, and then you probably do. Anyway, it's befuddling in a way because it's interior and it just kind of needs to be experienced. I think I even confused myself when I tried to talk about it, to be honest. But whenever I kind of come up to the edge of the experience, with a camera or without a camera, it just seems so terribly simple. It's just nothing. There's nothing. And wouldn't it be funny if that were true? All this working towards something we didn't need to work towards because we were already exactly in it, a part of it, not apart from it.
Do usually I finish this conversation with the question of what is a good life. I just wonder if you just said it quite succinctly there.
Oh, remind me what I said. I can't remember. But you did record it, so that's good.
Yeah. Just for your sense then of, given all we've discussed, like the sense of witnessing, but without kind of a deliberate sense of witnessing or observing, the sense of belonging that we, inherently experience. Like, it's not the sense of deserved, you were a part of this. Realizations almost without a deliberate sense of realizations, a subtraction of so many of the things that we think are necessary. I'd just love to get a sense of, for you, what comes to mind when I ask you what is a good life for you?
What is a good life? I think there's an experience of peacefulness. Like, here I am. And in that peacefulness, and they're probably described as something like where there's nowhere else I have to be, or could be. And there's certainly no one I should be. This is enough. From that sense, one is inspired to go do something. So go do it. No matter what that is. Because in that moment of peace, things occur to you. In other words, where you're caused to act from is just different. You weren't caused to act because you saw it on an advertisement or you heard someone else's story. You were caused to act because, well, you don't know how you know, you just kind of know. And you feel it. And then a good life might be going for it. Destiny almost, in a large sense and a small sense as well. I don't know why, but I'm going to do this without fear of whatever may happen. So, a sense of peace with one's place in the world and one's inclusion in the world, and allowing life itself to live itself through you. And I suppose that therein lies the partnership of, well, you kind of have to do something then. So do it. Rather than just be at peace. I suppose a life is to be lived, isn't it? That's probably what we're doing here. And you can do stuff. Just be cognizant of where you're caused to act from.
You know, I had the experience earlier when you asked me what did I just say, and I didn't know anymore, even though you had just said it, and and I'd heard it, and I don't know. I think there's, through the course of what you're saying, I hope people can pick up on this, because it's a crazy invitation that you make. I think not a deliberate one. I think engage or experience life in a different way. I'm not saying that's better, worse, whatever, but it's just it's a really, I think, a beautiful invitation. And I've watched a number of your soul biographies, and I don't know, I think, and I even love the simplicity of what you're talking about and the sense of subtraction. And I think the more people kind of engage with this, or even when you're listening to this, just the sense of, I hope it comes across almost, what I get is a sense of just an invitation from your presence, which I think is really, really unique. So I'd just like to say thank you so much for joining me today on the What is a Good Life podcast, because it's been a huge thrill for me once again.
Yeah, thank you. It just occurred to me that this probably is going to be really unusual for people, because normally when you give your time to a podcast or whatever, you are looking out for something. You know, like I'm going to listen to this because I might learn something, because this person might have some advice. But I think this is the other way around. You know, it's like just let it. You know, let the experience find you. I mean, that's probably the good life. Is just let it. Yeah. And so you kind of like the experience of a person, any person. You just got to lose yourself in it. If you're always looking out for something, trying to work it out, trying to find an answer, trying to work out what's in it for you or where this might be going, you'll never actually be paying attention, and you'll miss the experience of that person and your own life. So it's probably a big ask. But if you were to get lost in this, almost listen without listening, maybe something will find you. Yeah, it's unusual, isn't it? And it's heretical in the fact that it's the other way around. But then if I think if someone were being honest, that person would probably recognize, oh, that's at play anyway. The reason I've done some of the most significant things in my entire life, all throughout my life, is that way. I fell in love that way. I moved countries that way. I did this that way. Don't know where it came from. I just felt it. Makes no sense. It wasn't caused by anything. Just occurred to me. That's it. Just there's no control in that. That's terrifying.